name is Thais Gibson.
Thais Gibson.
Thais Gibson.
Thais Gibson.
Thais Gibson.
Thais Gibson.
I hope I pronounce her name properly. Thais Gibson.
I am so excited for you to be here with me today. Thank you for joining us. Brian, thank you so much for being here today. Really excited to dive in with our audience and talk about how to make our nutrition, our lifestyle choices sustainable, how to make things automatic. I think that sort of ties into a lot of the program stuff, that sort of subconscious mind component. How do we streamline everything in our lives? And I really personally believe the mind and body are so connected. And obviously, we talk on our channel so much about the mind. And I think that we want to find that alignment with, I think if we have proper nutrition, proper health, diet, lifestyle, habits, then our mind also has an easier time, and vice versa. So let's kick off and just, if you can tell our listeners a little bit about how you got into this field and why this is such a big passion of yours to begin with.
Thanks so much, Thais. Yeah, the feedback we got off our podcast was incredible. I'm still getting DMs about that, because talking about the subconscious mind, and we were talking about relationships, attachment styles, etc. But there's so much crossover when it comes to things like health and fitness, because so much of what goes on with nutrition in particular is going on in the subconscious. And my story is a little bit of a different one. I had serious health problems when I was a teenager. I missed a whole year of school with just problems with headaches. I was getting chronic headaches. I had to go for multiple MRIs, staying on top of it, getting blood work done every month. And nobody knew what the cause of it was. And then they settled down. I went to university, I went to college, I started drinking alcohol, which weirdly got rid of a lot of my headaches, which I'll come back to now in a couple of minutes, because it all ties into working through traumas, working through some of the stuff that was stuck on my body. But it culminated in me moving to the US. I got a job at Berkeley University. I was teaching soccer to kids in Berkeley University in the US. And about 2 months into my trip, I had to be hospitalized. I started spitting up blood, and I wasn't able to keep any food or water down. And they hospitalized me and put me into a hospital. And long story short, they said it was an ulcer that was bleeding, and I was spitting up blood, and that I had serious problems with my gut. And I got given antibiotics. I got given different protein pump inhibitor and tablets. I got given basically everything you could be given that was in tablet form, and none of it really helped. And it was around that time that I thought there has to be something else going on here. And for me, the foundation and the pyramid of prioritization was, okay, well, maybe it's my food. I'll look at my nutrition. I think I'm eating well, but I was eating a lot of things like protein bars, processed packets of chicken. I didn't eat a lot of fruits or vegetables, anything along those lines. So I started to educate myself around nutrition. So I started to make those changes. And lo and behold, over the space of about a year and a half, a lot of those issues with my stomach went away. My problems with my head and those chronic headaches went away. And I went more into that rabbit hole and decided, okay, this is something I want to study. So I became a nutritionist, I became a personal trainer, and I started working with people with their body composition, with their health. Ironically, as I came up later in life, some of those headaches started to come back, and I had to use and look into alternative therapies, different medicine, plant-based medicine treatments. And when I understood that a lot of that stored trauma, and I grew up in quite a tumultuous household when we were kids, and I never made the connection to the tie that my physical health and my mental health and my emotional health were all connected as one. And I was a personal trainer and a coach who thought that you could handle everything with nutrition, you could handle everything with exercise. But in reality, it's this interconnected spider web. Your trauma, your subconscious mind, your nutrition, your sleep, your supplementation, your food, all of these things are connected. And when you start to put a holistic lens on it, that's when you can truly heal, whether that's losing weight or toning up or feeling happier or less anxious and moving through the day in just a more peaceful way. It kind of brought me to where I am now. And our conversation on the podcast was talking about, some of those relationship attachments and the wounds from childhood and moving through those core wounds so that your core wounds aren't, and you're not bleeding on people who didn't cut you because you didn't heal those core wounds. And expanding my content online so that people can look at their nutrition, but they can look at their fitness and their mental health and their relationships and their childhood and their subconscious mind and know that it's all interconnected. And then over the last decade, my message online has been trying to educate my audience, very similar to you, that all these things are connected, whether it's health, wellness, and fitness, to your mental health, your trauma, your subconscious, to your relationships, romantic, interpersonal, friendships, and then knowing that everything in life is connected like that, and that whatever area you need to be served in is where you need to seek out. And that's what basically brought me to where I am today.
Wow, that's a fantastic story. I feel like it's so common for people in our space. Like you go through a personal journey and you sort of conquer yourself in a sense, and then you have all this wisdom to share with other people. So I always love to hear the success stories of different people and how it brought them there. So you said a few really interesting things. So obviously we've established a very strong mind-body connection. I find that people have different entry points into some of these things. Like for me, a lot of my entry point was originally like spirituality, psychology, and going down that path. And over time, circling back to health more and being like, oh, and educating myself there and just seeing that like I had all these great tools to work through things mentally, emotionally. But when I started getting like my sleep in order, proper sleep hygiene, when I started getting like my thyroid and gut health in order, when I started just improving a lot of those areas, I like didn't have all these things to work through. So it was funny, like your sort of resting state becomes more peaceful, and it really shows that mind-body connection. So you said you had this ulcer, and I've heard before, and we'll talk about some of the subconscious stuff in a moment, but I've heard before that an ulcer is actually just like H. pylori bacteria. Is that, and yet people sort of say, oh, it's caused by stress and things like that. So just out of curiosity, how did you resolve that?
None of the medicines or antibiotics worked for me. I went down the nutritional route and started looking at my lifestyle choices. I was also drinking quite a lot of alcohol around this time. It was a coping mechanism for me. But what I know now that I didn't know then was that part of the reasons and some of the childhood issues that I hadn't worked through, alcohol was a coping mechanism for me. So once I had alcohol in my system and I was drinking regularly, several nights a week, not an awful lot, but I was having 2, 3, 4 beers every night a week, and then maybe 10 or 11 on a Saturday and Sunday night. And I was working out and I was training and I was always been quite physically active. So I didn't look like I had a problem, but it was a coping mechanism for me. And because of my stomach issues, when I scaled back on the alcohol and I started to eat more whole foods, more fruits, more vegetables, I started to look at my sleep. I started to follow a very strict exercise regimen when it came to strength training and just increasing my metabolic rate so that my body was actually efficient at burning the fuel I was eating, because I had become completely inefficient at even burning the calories I was eating because my gut microbiome and the gut permeability, something you've talked about on the podcast with your gut issues and potentially leaky gut. I know there's a little bit of conflicting evidence based on the terminology, but the gut permeability is the language which is pretty accessible, meaning that there's an issue there. And I had all of that. But once I started to take care and look after my nutrition, the problem with the ulcer went away. And it wasn't the medication that helped. I was taking those for several months and I still felt as terrible as I did when the day I was hospitalized. I just wasn't spitting up blood anymore. And I was able to take control of that. And it's what got me interested in the mind-body connection. It's what got me interested in nutrition. We were the opposite. I had health, wellness, and fitness as my foundation. And then I became a lot more spiritual over time. Whereas it sounds like we went in the reverse. You had the spirituality and then the health, fitness came with it, which is really interesting to say. As you mentioned, stories, and everyone's story is so different. But I was able to heal that over the space of about 1.5 years. And then as life went on, it became part of my passion, not just to heal people who were unhealthy, but to heal people who were unhappy in themselves. They didn't like the way that they looked, or they were moving through the world with excess weight and they felt uncomfortable and they felt like they didn't have any body confidence. And I became very passionate about helping those people who were struggling either with food relationships or self-image or eating behaviors. I know you speak a lot about the subconscious mind. This is the whole thing. And we talked about this in depth on our episode. And subconscious around food is such a big thing. People who are emotional eaters versus confusing emotional hunger and physical hunger. These are things I unpack with a lot of people I work with, because most of us know that, and again, the internet has skewed this, and it's a bit of a catch-22, that some people say should we eat all plants, others saying we should eat all meat. But most qualified nutritionists or dietitians can agree that people should eat more plants, high quality micronutrient foods, complete protein sources, complex carbohydrates, healthy fats in most diets, in terms of Mediterranean / paleo / whole food, less processed food diet. Most can agree with that. And once you know that it's not education is the problem, it's application, you have to go deeper into the subconscious. Why do you self-destruct or self-sabotage with food? Why do you emotionally eat? Why do you turn to comfort eating every time you're lonely or sad or even happy and excited? Because it's not always a negative thing. Some people get excited and then they eat. So emotional hunger is this massive roller coaster for people. And I've spent a large portion of my career helping people navigate that so that they can have that food freedom and just a better relationship with food overall.
I love that. So I want to get into all that and where you sort of sit around the subconscious mind and patterns and how to really get to a healthier place if anybody's finding that within themselves. But before we go there, I just want to speak to the people listening who are maybe starting from scratch. So maybe they are, in their late 40s or even, somewhere in their early 20s, 30s, and they're going, you know what? I am having these kind of funny health issues come up. Maybe they're having more inflammation, maybe they're feeling tired, fatigued, and maybe they haven't really been down this path of like really revamping their health yet in their lives. So I'd love to start with just like some places to start. You mentioned some really great things in your journey in terms of just eating whole foods and giving up the processed foods. But if somebody was just starting down this path, what would you say to them are like those first major things that they can do to improve the quality of their physical health overall? And then we'll bring it into how do we get our mind on the same page so we actually execute on those different patterns?
That's a great question. And I am going to answer it from a nutritional standpoint, but something that underpins all of that is your sleep and your stress. And I always tell my listeners, I say it in books and on socials, that sleep particularly is what I call a true force multiplier. It's a term from the Marines and from Army that what's the one thing that implements and affects everything else, that if you implement it affects everything else in a positive way. Sleep balances hormones. It's going to balance particularly things like leptin and ghrelin, which is your hunger and satiation hormone, which are pivotal and crucial to regulate if you're trying to sustain any nutritional plan. So your sleep will regulate that. It'll help with cortisol, so your stress hormone. Now, cortisol is not a bad thing. It's what wakes you up in the morning, but excessive cortisol, chronic cortisol, too much stress is a problem. Acute stressors are actually quite a good thing. Exercise is an acute stressor. Cold exposure is an acute stressor. Heat is an acute stressor. They're all positive and have positive health markers over time for people. It's the chronic long-term stress, the figurative death by 1,000 cuts that tends to be really negative for people. So you want to manage that. So sleep is the bedrock of that and managing that stress level. After, with nutrition, the biggest mistake I see beginners make,
Ryan,
or someone at the
before you move on to that, just assuming that people are listening who are completely new, do you mind just giving a couple, like how can somebody even improve their quality of sleep? Is it like get the 8 hours, make sure that you're not looking at blue light before bed? Like if you can just give specific maybe action steps for each person too on each topic, I would love that.
Oh, amazing. Yeah. So one thing I get people to focus on is sleep quality, not sleep quantity. And the simple way of putting that is you're better to have 6 hours of uninterrupted sleep than 9 hours of broken sleep where you've woken up several times. And I'm not saying that you should get 6 hours. The research shows that most people need 7.5 to 8 hours to function at a high capacity. There's a very, very small percentage of people who are able to work well and function on less than 7 hours of sleep per night. But some people need 7, some people need 8, some people need 9. And it changes depending on age, and it changes depending on your activity levels. To get a good night's sleep, I normally get people to look at the quality, which means that you're trying not to wake up regularly through the night. So one way you do that is your food before bed. Some people eat before bed and they hit the pillow and they're out for the count because their digestion is very good, their metabolism is very quick, and if they don't, they actually could wake up hungry in the middle of the night. For somebody else like me, whose digestion is a little bit slower, that will keep me awake for hours. So I have to eat 2-3 hours before bed. I can't have anything close to bedtime or it'll keep me awake. It'll sit in my stomach and I just won't be able to sleep. So experimenting with food intake before bed, limiting caffeine or stimulants is also a very low-hanging fruit that a lot of people make a mistake on. So something like caffeine for the average person, now people metabolize caffeine differently depending on age and genetics, but the average person metabolizes caffeine at about a half-life of 5.5 hours. So if you drink a cup of coffee at 12 o'clock in the day, 200 mcgs of caffeine, a normal regular cup of coffee, by 5:30 that evening, half that coffee is still in your system. So think about pushing that forward to 4 p.m., 5 p.m. when you're trying to wind down and go to sleep, and you get what's called that tired but wired feeling, where you're exhausted, you're physically tired because your body's been active and moving all day and doing things all day, but your brain is still switched on. That's because the caffeine is still in your system. So just scaling that back so that you're not having that stimulant intake straight away can have a massive improvement on the quality of sleep for a majority of people by just that one change alone. And then the last thing I would look at is water and blue light. So if you're somebody that drinks water a lot and you're drinking it too late at night and you're getting up to go to the bathroom, it's not ideal. You probably want to scale it back a couple of hours before bed, especially if you've got, I've got a tiny bladder. My friends are always joking. They're like, I know where all the bathrooms are between here and my home house, which is an hour away where my mum and dad live, because I have to pull in 2 or 3 times on the way just to go to the toilet because I'm always drinking water. So I'm one of those small bladder people. So I don't drink several hours before bed. But again, experiment with it. And then the last is the blue light. So you mentioned blue light there. I mentioned cortisol earlier. Cortisol is your stress hormone. Melatonin is your sleep hormone, for keeping it very simple. So you want your melatonin at nighttime to be high. You want your cortisol to be low. It's actually the reverse in the morning is what wakes you up. Your melatonin goes down, your cortisol goes up. It's what gets you out of bed and wakes you up in the morning. And that blue light from your screen, from your phone, from your laptop, from a television blocks that melatonin production. So you need that hormone to be high at nighttime. So you're trying to block it out either with blue light blocking glasses or an app on your phone, or just removing screens a couple of hours before bed. Those tips are quite practical that most people can do and can yield to a very positive, good night's sleep once you've experimented to find what works best for you.
Okay, those are amazing tips. This is fantastic. I'm so excited. Okay, so sleep, perfect. Such great tips for individuals. I just wanted to pop in here and let you know we are doing a 7-day free trial to the All Access Membership Pass at PDS, which means you get access to literally everything inside of the school. And this includes the 4 live webinars I do with our students every single week. And on top of that, you get access to all of our different courses. We have over 55 different courses on relationships, communication, boundaries, emotional mastery, guilt and shame, learning your needs, so many different facets that are really important to master our lives and feel really good about our lives going forward. And last but not least, there's a daily community event. We have trained facilitators and coaches who are in there doing that work, showing up to support you on your journey every single day. Please join me on the other side. Come check it out. See if it's a fit for you. I'd love to see you there. Go ahead and sign up by clicking the link in the description box below. And then after sleep, what comes next in terms of that sort of nutritional part? And then we'll move into the mindset part afterwards.
With nutrition, the mistake I see most often is people making too many changes too soon. And I put up a post every single January on my social media channels, because this is normally when people are following a fad diet or a slimming club or something that's just not going to be sustainable. I always tell them, if you can't follow it in the first week of June, you shouldn't start it the first week of January. Meaning that if you can't stick to it after a couple of weeks or a month, you shouldn't be starting it in the first place. And that is normally making too many changes too soon. And these might be quote unquote healthy changes. But for most people, if you're starting a little bit later, and everyone starts exactly when they're supposed to start, there is no late, there is no early. It's you found your health journey in the path and you're on that path exactly when you were meant to be on. Although you might be comparing it to other people, but your journey is your journey, and keeping your focus on that is really important. And looking at, well, what's the one change that I could make today that's actually going to be helpful? And I tell people, look at breakfast. Just look at one meal. Pick one of your 3 meals. Assuming you're eating breakfast, lunch, and dinner, pick one of your 3 meals and just make a good, healthy food choice in that meal. So generally a good protein source in that meal. It might be some scrambled eggs, free range organic eggs, if possible. If you want to go even higher quality, maybe it's going to be an omelet. Maybe it's going to be a bowl of oatmeal with some chia seeds and some organic blueberries. And you don't change anything for your lunch and dinner. Keep it exactly the same, but consistently stick to a good breakfast for the next 2 weeks, the next 3 weeks, the next 4 weeks, the next month and a half. And then look at your lunch. So change out what you would have for lunch generally and make a healthier food choice. Maybe some whole grain spaghetti bolognese, or maybe having a whole grain or whole meal sandwich, assuming you're not avoiding bread or you have no issue with gluten or any of the food choices. And you're going with some free range chicken, or you're going with some salmon, assuming you're eating fish or you're pescatarian or you're eating meat. And then after another 2 months, look at your dinner. So over the space of a 3-4 month period, you haven't done a full overhaul. You've just made small changes yourself. Now, I think if you're working with a professional or working with a coach, you can make more changes because you have someone keeping you accountable and you're borrowing their expertise, you're borrowing their education, you're borrowing their confidence so that you're able to make those changes. But if you're doing it by yourself, making too many changes too soon means you fall off track. Similar to, when you're working with people in therapy, you can do a lot more with somebody than if you're just advising them through a podcast or advising them through a social media post, because they need the accountability structure in place, and your health, your nutrition, your diet, your fitness is very similar.
And it's so interesting because when you talk about that, I think of the subconscious mind and how like that repetition and emotion is what fires and wires those new neural pathways. And I've definitely had times in my own health journey over the last like 6 or 7 years where I've been like, I'm going to change all these things. And you feel like it's just not sustainable. But I found, and obviously I kind of had some insight into it, but I was like, no, small things, like one little thing at a time. Once you feel like it's part of your programming, it happens naturally and automatically. Then it's like, okay, this is under my belt. I've got this. And then you can keep expanding outwards. And suddenly you look back at one point and like your whole lifestyle has changed in a really powerful way. So I love that. I love that. Very aligned with that. And if you were to say some things that people can look out for, I feel like we live, unfortunately, in such a toxic world nowadays with like the food supply and pesticides and herbicides. Like there's just so many things going on. And I've been looking recently into how a lot of like our soil is just not as nutritious. So it's really easy to be like more vitamin and mineral deficient. So what would you say in terms of some things to look out for? Do you have any like supplements you really recommend as we go through this sort of nutrition part?
It's a really interesting question because I stay on top of the research because this is my job, this is my area. And everything you said there is completely accurate when it comes to the depletion of the soil and the mineral quality compared to 30 years, 40 years ago, where there was just a higher level of nutrients in the soil, even with the food we're eating. But it can go to an opposite end of a spectrum. And if you're following social media accounts, if you're following different people online, it actually gets to the point where you can't eat anything but just drink water. And then some people will say that, like, it actually is like where, you can't eat plants, you shouldn't eat broccoli, you shouldn't eat meat, you shouldn't eat fish, you shouldn't eat carbs, you shouldn't eat X, Y, or Z. So it can over extreme to the other side. What I like to bring to nutrition is take a little bit more of a common sense approach in a world that doesn't have a lot of common sense around nutrition at the minute. And it's not a hard and fast rule, but a useful rule. This is my grandmother's rule. I put this in one of my books with a caveat that this isn't for everybody, that if it was around when she was a kid, it's probably a decent food source for the most part. And another one that I use is if it's not advertised on TV, this is very applicable for people in the US and Canada. If it's advertised on TV, it's probably not that good for you. Like, I don't remember seeing too many ads for broccoli on TV
or apples,
or apples. No, you tend to not see it. So that again breaks down in some sectors for sure, but is a useful approach in terms of original navigation and filtering. But I think when it comes to nutrition, you're always looking for square pegs into square holes, and no two people are the same. It's exactly the same as therapy and mindset and working through. There is no one size fits all. If there was, everybody would follow the same therapy. And you know this, Thais, because of your background. You have so many modalities and areas that you specialize in work in, and you acquired those because you know different tools work for different people. Mm-hmm. Nutrition is very similar. One person will work great in a ketogenic diet. Somebody else will work great on a paleo diet. Somebody else will work better intermittent fasting. Whereas those three protocols could be detrimental to somebody else's health and body composition goals because it just doesn't fit for them based on genetic history, based on lifestyle, based on subconscious habitual habits around food from childhood, from teenage years. Misacquired information, misinformation around food, like calories, macros. People have so many mad misconceptions around these things when food, and I tell people we put a lot of morals onto our food. food doesn't have any morals. Like, we project those morals onto it. Like, broccoli's not going to save you from a burning building, and a chocolate bar is not going to stab you down a back alley. Like, there's no good or bad food. It's our projected morals onto those food. It's all about context. Some foods are high in nutrients and high in calories. Some food are high in calories, low in nutrients, and a combination of everything in between. A chocolate bar is low in nutrients, high in calories, but you know, if you fit it into a calorie plan with somebody and it's soul food, it's something you love. Like, I would rather not live the rest of my life if you remove chocolate from it. Don't have a sweet tooth. I have sweet teeth. So I need to have a little bit every day because it just keeps me happy. I don't eat 10 bars, but I'll happily have a bar and fit it into my plan. And I advise people to look at something similar, that there's no point eliminating entire foods and entire macronutrient groups just because somebody online said it. And this is the same with me saying it now. You need to experiment and find what's going to be best for you. And I think nutrition is exactly that, because so much of it's going on subconsciously, and there's all these mechanisms for self-sabotage around food, emotional eating around food. And these aren't nutritional questions. These are mindset. These are emotional, subconscious based questions. So it's not a one size fits all. It's a, what do you need help with? Where do you need to be served with? Do you need somebody to just design a nutritional plan that you can follow because you don't know the difference between a cookie and an apple in terms of nutrients? Cool, then that's what you go and do. Or do you know that, yeah, broccoli is really good and spinach is really high nutrient, but I just can't stop sabotaging myself with food because I have an emotional eating history, because every time I smell a burger or chips, the floodgates open because it reminds me of a happier time in my life and I'm not very happy now. That's all subconscious mind. That has nothing to do with education around food. So it's important to establish where you are on your journey so that you can find something that'll serve you on it.
I love that. And we talk a lot in our school about the concept of individuation. Like, in a relationship, somebody can say, I'm okay with this, but I'm not okay with that. And one person can be vehemently opposed to what that person just said. And there's not a right or wrong answer for things. It's us actually learning ourselves, taking ourselves into consideration, figuring out our own patterns, our own truth. And through testing and trying different things, we'll learn, okay, this is actually where I stand on these core issues. These are my needs. These are my standards. And this is what works well for me in life. And I think that approach is in relationships. I think it's in mental, emotional well-being, but in a big, big way, I also think it's part of health. And I think there's, if somebody's not individuated, they'll fall into all these different categories. I actually went through this. When I was, I think this is like 7 years ago, this is what kicked off my health journey. I was like, I'm going to be vegan. And so I did it for 14 months and it just like honestly flushed my health down the toilet. It just wasn't good for me. And I later learned, like, okay, I had some gut health issues to clean up and I had some different things to work on first. And so it wasn't a good fit, but that ultimately led me to stop just following the internet, what the internet says or what I think or feel about different topics, and actually consider myself. So I really hear what you're saying in this, which is like, we need to have this individuated approach and test things and try things and learn and see what we feel. And I think that our body will always give us feedback. Like, we'll feel more energized, we'll sleep better if things are working for us. And if it's not that the case, then we'll see the reverse start to take place. So let's take a quick break for our sponsor. Have you ever signed up for a cell phone plan that seemed affordable only to be shocked by how much your bill ends up costing you each month? Because I know that's happened to me. And I feel your pain. Mint Mobile is here to recuse you from those unexpected charges with premium wireless plans starting at just $15 a month. And when they say $15 a month, they actually mean it. All plans come with high-speed data and unlimited talk and text delivered on the nation's largest 5G network. Plus, you can use your own phone and keep your current phone number too. Switch away from overpriced wireless plans and get 3 months of premium wireless access for just $15 a month with Mint Mobile. To get this new customer offer, go to mintmobile.com/Thais, Thais. That's mintmobile.com/Thais, Thais. There's a $45 upfront payment required, equivalent to $15 a month. New customers on first 3-month plan only. Speed slower above 40 gigabytes on unlimited plan. Additional taxes, fees, and restrictions apply. See Mint Mobile for details. Now for a quick message from our sponsor. Can you believe it? In just a couple of months, it'll be time to switch our wardrobe over from summer to fall. Luckily, I found a way to stay stylish as the leaves change without breaking the bank, thanks to Quince. Quince has quickly become my go-to for luxurious cashmere sweaters, Pants for every occasion, elegant silk tops, and long, cozy cardigans. Their collection makes it so effortless to refresh my wardrobe every season with high-quality pieces. I personally can't stop wearing their athletic wear, both at the gym and even just casually around the house. I snagged several shirts in beautiful colors and love that they feel so soft and so breathable. The best part is that by partnering with top-tier factories, Quince eliminates the middleman and passes the savings directly to us. This means that their items are priced at 50 to 80% lower than similar brands, making luxury super accessible. But what I love the most about Quince is that they are committed to ethical fashion. They only collaborate with factories that uphold safe, ethical, and responsible manufacturing practices. So not only do we look good, but feel good about our choices. Make switching a season's breeze with Quince's high-quality closet essentials. Head to quince.com/Thais for free shipping on your order and 365-day returns. That's QUINCE/Thais to get free shipping and 365-day returns. Quince.com/Thais. So let's go into the topic of emotional eating here for a moment. And, as you see people, let's say they're like, okay, I'm figuring out what's working for me. I can tell perhaps, for example, when I eat a keto diet and include maybe some like low glycemic fruits, I do well in that particular case. If somebody's in that position, but then you see that they just can't seem to have like a healthy relationship to, like you said, like eating some chocolate here and there, what are some common patterns or themes you find behind this? And what are some pieces of sort of strategy you give to individuals in this particular case?
That's another pretty good one, Thais. Yeah, like it's a bit of a Pandora's box, because with nutrition, the old adage that one man or woman's meat is another man or woman's poison is so true. You put one person on a vegan plan, they feel amazing. Like there was a documentary a few years ago on Netflix called The Game Changers, which went really viral, and talking about all the positives of a plant-based program. And what they don't always tell you is, one, a lot of evidence gets cherry-picked with nutrition, meaning that you can find anything to support a backup or a claim. And there's also people who would follow that plant-based protocol, have a terrible response, and they don't get featured in a documentary or in a book because they don't support the evidence that they need to put across in that. And I think it's really important that people know that going in, when they're reading a book or they're reading or watching a documentary, that this can happen. Because somebody that is eating McDonald's 3 times a day switches to a plant-based diet and vegan-based diet, they're going to feel amazing. They're literally going to go from highly processed food, loads of saturated fat, sugar and salt, to nutrient-dense food. They're going to feel incredible. You take somebody from a Paleolithical background who's an athlete and switch them to a vegan program, they're probably going to feel worse, because you've now removed their complete protein source. They now need to combine foods. The problem with the vegan plan or plant-based program, and I'm a fan for some people, is you don't get all your essential amino acids in single foods. You have to combine them. You eat a piece of chicken or you eat fish, you have all your essential amino acids. So essential amino acids are the amino acids, the building blocks of protein. Essential amino acids are what your body needs to get from food or supplements. You can't make it by yourself. There's essential fatty acids. Essential amino acids are, funnily enough, there's no such thing as an essential carbohydrate, meaning that you can survive perfectly fine without them. They'll give you energy. There's some nutrients in them, but you can survive perfectly fine without them. You remove your fats, you remove your protein, you're going to have breakdown in your body and degradation in your body, because you need those essential amino acids and essential fatty acids. But protein, chicken, fish has that. In a plant-based diet, you actually have to combine foods in order to get all those essential amino acids, so that you don't get the negative health issues. And then you need to supplement with vitamin B12, etc., so that you're not getting those negative health outcomes from following that protocol. So every diet is like that. Ketogenic diet, one person based on the starting point will do incredible on it. Somebody else will do terrible on it. And what I always tell people, and I'm sometimes get classed as a fitness influencer online, like I don't self-identify as that. I help people with nutrition, and I run fitness programs, and I'm a qualified trainer and certified nutritionist. But you will find that people, whatever works for them is what they'll spread as gospel. It's false consensus bias. Well, I assume because everybody else thinks like me, I'm going to think the same, or because this has worked for me, confirmation bias, I'm going to promote it to everybody else. And that's where the confusion comes from. And with nutrition, you always want to take the approach of, right, what am I looking to achieve? If it's health and whatever that looks like for you, because it's a subjective term. For me, it's to have high energy. It's not having midday slumps, because you're not supposed to have midday slumps. That's a sign that there's something wrong with your nutrition. You're supposed to sleep straight through the night. You're supposed to feel highly energized in the morning and not need a coffee to get going. That's what health looks like for me and for a lot of people. So you want a nutritional plan that supports that, and then you can test it as you go along, because certain foods will agree with certain people and they won't work well for others. So you're playing around with that yourself. It's fun to experiment. If you're like me and you geek out on it, you'll have fun experimenting with different foods and different nutritional protocols. And if you're someone who's just like, I need this goal, I just want to feel better, I want to increase my health, my vitality, then you work with the professional. Like, there's loads of great coaches out there, great dietitians out there. It's just about finding who's going to be a good fit for you. Who do you like, know, and trust, and then potentially working with them. So with nutrition, I think it's important to understand that. And then your emotional element comes underneath it. One check-in I get my clients to do who struggle with emotional eating is the difference between physical hunger and emotional hunger. And there's just a 3 check-in that I get people to do. And this is a table in the last book. And it was the thing that got quoted back to me the most from it. And that's physical hunger is normally slow. It normally comes from the stomach. And you normally have a low energy feeling that comes with it. Mental and emotional hunger is normally above the neck. It's normally in your head. It's sudden, it's quick, and it's normally a rush of blood to your head that you're getting. So that one check-in can allow you to determine, well, am I actually physically hungry here, or am I emotionally hungry? And doing that can allow you to reverse engineer a plan that, well, actually, I've eaten lunch today, but I'm really stressed out because, I'm after having a fight with my partner, or my boss is after yelling at me. And now I'm like, I really want a bar of chocolate or some cookies or some ice cream. That's emotional hunger versus, I fasted all day and my stomach is gurgling at me. It's very gradual and came on over the last 4 hours. That's physical hunger. That means you need to address your actual physical cues and hunger cues through the day and build a strategy around that. So arming yourself with that knowledge and information with that check-in can at least allow you to address the correct problem.
I love that. That's so interesting. And I think that's a huge thing for so many different individuals, because I think people, like you said at the beginning, people eat when they're stressed, they eat when they're happy and they're trying to celebrate, they eat when they're around people and trying to connect. Like, food becomes something we have so many programmed associations to, both good and bad. And so we often sort of take action in a way without consciously thinking about it. And I think that also encourages a lot of like mindfulness in people's relationship to food. Now, let's say somebody's in a position where they say to you, Brian, like you said earlier, like smelled the hamburger or the potato chips or whatever it is. And they're like, yes, I smell the hamburger or the potato chips. And then the floodgates open. So they just eat and can't seem to really contain themselves. What do you help people with in their mindset in that particular case? Or do you say just sort of avoid those foods? Or what's your strategy for somebody in that case?
I have a prevention strategy and a cure strategy. So the prevention strategy is you normally want to remove yourself from the physical environment. And I think this is very similar to a lot of work. And we talked about this in the podcast a little bit. If you're being activated or triggered by a person, sometimes the removal to regain your composure and your emotional control and emotional nervous system regulation, and then reintroducing yourself into the situation is the best way to approach it. It's actually very similar with food. Sometimes if you have that food and it's, that, right, if I eat this, it's going to open up floodgates. I just need to remove myself physically from this environment. And that might be just going outside, going for a short walk. It might be just going into a different room in the house and just getting yourself out of it. Let your nervous system regulation calm back down because you're having an emotional response because it's triggering off something from earlier in life that, and again, sometimes it's positive, sometimes it's negative. It's not, again, it really is relative, but in most cases with food, it's normally a positive association and a memory. It's you walk into the kitchen and it reminds you of what it was like when you were a kid, when mum cooked Sunday dinner, or your grandmother put on your favorite meal for you every Saturday night, or whatever it is. There's emotional ties to these foods, and that's all well and good. I'm never telling people to not enjoy that food freedom. The last thing I want to do is put people off food. I'm like, look, if you want to go and enjoy those foods, by all means, go and enjoy them. But if there's something that you can't control and you just have this nearly like a Jekyll and Hyde scenario where somebody else takes over temporarily and they just consume all the food and you're left in this mini food coma, then you probably want to avoid that as much as possible. That's the prevention. The cure is reevaluating, reframing, and resetting. And reevaluating means that it's happened. You're not a bad person because you've overeaten, although, yeah, you feel horrible and you might be bloated and you feel a bit sick and you're in a mini food coma, but you're not a bad person. You didn't kill somebody. You didn't do anything bad. You just fell off a nutritional plan. Reframe it. Oh, okay, how is this a positive thing? Maybe you were going to do a workout the next day and you have so much more energy for that. Or maybe you have a really busy day tomorrow and you know there's going to be periods where you're just going to have to fast because you're too busy to eat, but you actually don't need the calories because you've consumed all your calories for 2 days in that one meal. So you're actually going to be fine. So you can put a positive spin or reframe mental gymnastics on it and then reset. Okay, well, I wake up the next day. I don't starve myself intentionally. I don't go to the gym for 4 hours. I don't do anything excessive. I just reset and I get back on plan again. And I think once you use that approach, even if you've fallen off track, as the best of us do under the best of circumstances at times, you can reevaluate, re-examine and reset or reframe and reset. And that can be a useful protocol. So that's prevention and cure.
That's fantastic. And it's so funny, like when you think about people's relationship to food, it's like people have such a funny relationship to food, I would say 80% of the time, like guilt around food, shame around food, joy around food. Like it's almost this part of life that people, if they have a lot of unresolved emotions and patterns, it's like it's so easy to project it onto food in particular. So very, very interesting. And I'm curious just for a moment, you mentioned fasting a couple of times. What is your take on fasting? Are you a person who really believes in intermittent fasting, water fast? Like what's your sort of go-to there?
I think with fasting, it's actually similar to how I approach all approaches to nutrition. The intention and the goal determine whether it's good or bad, or helpful or unhelpful, or supportive or unsupportive. I think fasting because you've overeaten is a bad strategy, and just you end up fueling that guilt and shame spiral and set yourself up for a similar situation in the future. I don't think it works in that scenario. If you're someone whose schedule is very busy in the morning and you're just not hungry, fasting can be a great protocol. I do intermittent fasting. It suits my schedule. I get up early and I work out in the morning. So it really suits my schedule. So I'm a fan of it in that context. If you are looking for health, longevity, some autophagy, which you can also get with just a calorically deficit or a calorically depleted program, if you're using the studies to support that, again, water fasting just speeds up that. Yeah, can be really helpful. The research around that is quite strong. So I don't think it's the intermittent fasting that's the problem. It's how you're using it. It's the goal of the individual and it's the intent behind it.
Yeah, I love that. Will you just explain autophagy for people who are not familiar with the concept?
So autophagy is simply put just cell death. So your body eating the cells, the excessive cells that it needs, so that you're going to be able to live longer, healthier. It can help with things like your gut microbiome, your digestion, your just overall health. So autophagy is a term you'll come across in a lot of longevity books and longevity podcasts for people who are looking to just improve that cell death so that they're able to have a longer and healthier lifespan.
I've heard before that like when autophagy occurs, it actually targets like less healthy cells first. Is that true?
From the research as of now in 2024, that's it. Generally, you will have a lot of cancer experts talking about autophagy, that it works on the negative cells first, and that's why it's so, and it's been shown. Again, the problem with some of these studies is they're all done in rodents. We haven't done them in humans. They haven't been done long enough in humans. They're all rodent based, but we're quite similar in terms of structure, and that's why a lot of studies that are done for nutrition and food and supplementation are done on rodents and rats first, and it crosses over to us. But it shows that calorie depletion and fasting both work for that autophagy for negative cells, so that you have that decrease risk of cancer over time.
Yeah, that's super interesting. Okay, so last couple questions. So you mentioned gut permeability, and I just want to go there for a moment because it's one of my favorite topics, and I just hope anybody listening like lands on this part. And if you can just share maybe a couple small symptoms that people would see if they are struggling with gut permeability. And, obviously a lot of the terms people use is like leaky gut. I think they're just saying gut permeability, but they don't, it's just a slang term. So when it comes to this, what are some symptoms people may see if they're struggling with it? And then what are just a couple of action steps or strategies you would give to people?
Gut permeability or leaky gut is the term you use, and a lot of experts, you've had some on the podcast, I've had some on my podcast, they hate that term leaky gut because it's so scientifically incorrect. But gut permeability just basically mean that there's an issue with the intestinal wall and some of the food you're eating is leaking out through it, hence the term leaky gut. And I think that's how it got popularized. The major symptoms, the most obvious ones. Now, the problem with people speaking about the gut is the gut is so connected to everything else. So mood and your serotonin, your happy hormone, all these things are so heavily connected to your gut brain axis that people will say that every issue from depression and anxiety and mental health is linked to your gut. And there's definitely an element of that being true. Whether it's all true is up for discussion. I think you'd be able to speak on that much better than I can. The ones that are very scientifically supported is bloating, where you're just going to be walking around bloated. You're going to feel like your food's not moving through correctly. So if you picture like a pipe, it feels like it's blocked up in the pipe and it's not moving through the way it's supposed to. That will be a sign of gut permeability or an issue with, as I said, I'm using the term leaky gut interchangeably, but just to keep it accessible for people. That would be one symptom. You'll find that normally your immune system gets quite compromised, because if you have an issue with your gut microbiome and your good bacteria to bad bacteria is out of balance, it's going to compromise your immune system. So you're going to get sick very easily. So you're going to get a lot of colds, a lot of flus. You're not going to be able to fight those things. You can have a negative impact on sleep. But outside of the digestion and the bloating, which is the most obvious one, it has a whole host of effects on other parts of the body, from mood disorders. Oh, I've got balloons on my screen for some reason. From mood disorders and anxiety and mental health. But there's so many other contributing factors to that. That's not just your issue with your gut microbiome. And there's a bit of a chicken and egg scenario that because you're super stressed and you have trauma, it's negatively impacting your gut, or you have issues with the food and the over consumption of processed ingredients, that your gut microbiome and your gut bacteria is out of balance, that it's negatively impacting your mood and your anxiety and your depression. So there's a bit of a chicken and egg scenario there for working off the research, but they would be some of the most common issues that people would have in symptoms. In terms of addressing it, then different things work. The research says you're going to look at your nutrition overall. So you want to eat slowly, eat mindfully. You want to have a good balanced diet in a very traditional sense. So more whole foods, less processed foods. You're going to minimize your sugar and stimulant intake, sugar particularly, so that you're not feeding any, candida, you're not feeding any negative issues in your gut, and looking at it from that side. But then there are other protocols, and you mentioned fasting earlier. This is a little bit of a gray area, so I'm a bit hesitant to recommend it, because anecdotally, and a little bit of research to support it, fasting can help people heal their gut microbiome, because it's giving it a break. It's kind of like if you were driving your car for 48 hours straight, it just gives it a bit of a break when you pull it over to the side of the road and turn it off. Fasting can do something similar with your gut. So if you're someone who's struggling, having those extended fasts or just periods where you're not eating all the time can help a little bit with your gut as well.
Yeah, I love that. And give your gut a break and a chance to really digest everything in there instead of just constantly running and running. Well, this has been really fantastic. So tell me and our audience here a little bit about what you're up to next, and where people can learn more about all the things that you're doing in the world.
Thanks so much, Thais. I absolutely love this. I've been very blessed with everything I'm doing now. I'm working on the next book, which will be my 5th one, which will hopefully be out at some stage next year. So that's the high priority at the minute. And I'm bringing and climbing Kilimanjaro in Tanzania in October. So I'm kind of, that's one side of my physical, the other side of the mental, and then everything else is just continually growing the business. Having great people on the podcast, like our episode, again, one of my favorites. Like my best friend message was like, I am saving that and listening to it every month. I was like, amazing class. I'm just message so nice. Tell her. So I've been very blessed, very lucky. Everyone in my life is healthy and well at the minute. Business is going great, work is going great. So getting out the new book, finishing off the last touches on that, and then Kilimanjaro in October are kind of the 2 main things I'm focused on at the minute.
Good for you. And where can people learn about your offerings, your book? Like, where can people actually find that information?
Amazing. Yeah, I'm on everything. BrianKeaneFitness.com is the website. Brian Keane Fitness on Instagram. The Brian Keane Podcast is my flagship show. We're one of the top health podcasts in Ireland and the UK. And that's my baby. I absolutely love that. That is the thing I would do and probably will do until the day I die. Because again, assuming podcasts are still in their traditional format in 60 years time, so I'm hoping to live to 96, 97. But the podcast as well. But I'm on everything. If people want to search Brian Keane Fitness, and the website has all the programs, Amazon has all the books, and then the podcast, as I mentioned, is Brian Keane Fitness.
Perfect. Well, thank you so much for sharing. Thank you for being here with us today, our audience, everybody listening, and looking forward to chatting again soon.
Thank you so much again.
If you enjoyed this episode, please take a moment to subscribe, rate, and review us on your favorite podcast platform. Share it with friends and family who are on their journey of personal development and growth, and thank you for listening. Next week, we'll be back with more insights to guide you on your journey. And until then, keep practicing our tools and strategies to change your subconscious mind and apply some of the powerful learnings from this podcast so that you experience real life transformation.